Before the first city rose from the dust, before kings carved laws into stone, there was only the wild, untamed, ruthless, and indifferent. A world where the strong thrived and the weak perished. Where survival was not a right but a fleeting privilege. The hunter's spear, the warlord's blade, the conqueror's fire. These were the first instruments of power. No treaties, no borders, no laws, only the primal struggle. Where blood marked the land and might alone dictated fate. Have we truly left that world behind? Or does the law of the jungle still whisper beneath the polished halls of diplomacy? Shaping the rise and fall of nations. The development of human civilization. Episode 1. From Jungle to Civilization. The Awakening of Human Society. Witness the origins of power. At the dawn of time, humanity had yet to awaken from the depths of chaos. It was a vast and merciless world, one without borders, without laws, and without language to define the difference between us and them. The wind howled, and the morning light was dim. A white mist veiled the wilderness as snowflakes fell silently, covering the mud and bloodstains. The prey was heavy, and the savages dragged it through the snow, their footsteps sinking deep, their eyes filled with the resolve to survive. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals roamed this harsh land, their weapons no more than sharpened stone spears, their law dictated by a single brutal truth: the strong survive, the weak perish. Violence was the earliest language still warm bone, a fresh kill enough to ignite a struggle to the death. Blood spilled across the plains, marking the ever-shifting balance of power. In the shadowy depths of the Chauvet Cave in France, the paintings of stampeding bison and snarling beasts stand as eternal echoes of an ancient world, raw and untamed. And yet, humans were not mere beasts. They learned to share their prey. To encircle and outwit giant creatures. And above all, to trust one another. At the Shango site in Africa, archaeologists discovered skulls with fractures, indicating that early humans experienced violent conflicts. However, these wars were not mere chaotic massacres, but rather organized competitions between tribes. These early societies engaged not only in warfare, but also in negotiations, alliances, and even the formation of rudimentary power structures. From the Shango to the broader prehistoric world, humanity gradually transitioned from chaos to order, with tribal warfare playing a crucial role in the evolution of civilization. At last, the rulers of the earth realized that the land could be tamed, rivers could be harnessed, and beasts could be penned. Life was no longer an endless chase between hunter and prey. They laid down their wandering footsteps, sowed the first seeds in fertile river valleys, and gathered around firelit hearths, shaping the foundations of home. And so villages were born by 9000 BCE. In the heart of the Jordan Valley, Jericho rose from the dust, its mighty walls standing firm against the winds and the beasts, and against the greed of men. These walls were more than just stone. They marked the line between order and chaos, between those who told the land and those who coveted its bounty. When the fields turned golden and the granaries swelled with harvest, the eyes of outsiders, those who had not yet learned to sow, began to linger in the shadows, hungry and envious. Beneath the soil of Tauheim, Germany, the Tauheim death pit whispers a grim tale from 5,000 years ago. 34 shattered skulls, ribs pierced, bodies broken, not by the claws of wild beasts, but by the weapons of rival tribes. Yet conquest, in turn, gave birth to rule. No longer was the strongest merely the best hunter. He was now a leader, a lawgiver, a king. He imposed order, rationed food, and punished defiance. Thus, in the blood and soil of the ancient world, the roots of power took hold. Mankind, once a mere wanderer of the wild, now walked the path toward governance and civilization. Millennia passed, and the scattered tribes wove themselves into cities. No longer did the land belong to the hunter's fleeting steps. It now bore the imprint of kings. On the vast plains of Mesopotamia, the towering walls of Uruk rose against the sky. Within these mud-brick fortresses stood temples to the gods and the palaces of nobles. This was no longer a mere refuge for survival. It was the beating heart of civilization. The first cities, the first kings, the first written words, all spoke of humanity's longing for structure, for permanence, for order. It was a world where might still reign, but no longer through brute strength alone. Now, power required law. In 1754 BCE, the Babylonian king Hammurabi carved his decree into cold black basalt, the first great code of laws in human history. The Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This was not a cry for vengeance, it was a definition of justice. Once in the lawless wilderness, killing had been instinct. Now, in the kingdom of men, it was crime. Where once chaos ruled, now law held sway. Where once revenge burned, now punishment was measured. The rule of the jungle had given way to the social contract. And yet, even as laws took root, war's shadow did not fade. Along the banks of the Nile, the armies of Pharaoh marched. Uniting Egypt beneath the twin crowns of Upper and Lower Kingdoms. Far across the Aegean, a different kind of war was stirring. One fought not only for land, but for love, for pride, for power. The war for Troy would soon ignite. Bards would raise their voices in song. Homer would set pen to parchment. The clash of Achilles and Hector would echo through time, immortalized in the Iliad. And as Troy's mighty walls crumbled in fire and blood, one truth remained. Even as humanity entered the age of nations and law, it could not escape the chains of war. From the beasts of the wild to the architects of civilization, humanity has struggled across the ages to break free from the grip of the jungle, to replace brute force with order, to trade violence for laws, to forge societies upon trust rather than fear. And yet history flows onward, turbulent as ever. Light and darkness entwine in an unending dance. We have left the forests, raising towers and cities in their place. We have written laws, yet wars still rage. We have built international orders, yet conflict remains our shadow. So now we stand once more at the crossroads of choice. Will we embrace cooperation or revert to the law of the wild? Will we trust in contracts and reason, or submit once more to force and dominion? This is humanity's eternal question. The story not yet finished, the chapter still to be written. Next episode, Social Contract. The Code of Hammurabi was inscribed on a basalt stele, and the pharaoh's royal power has flowed along the Nile for millennia. The seeds of order took root amid warfare and conquest. Yet this was only the preliminary outline of the social contract. While the king's decrees maintained power, they did not allow individuals to truly have a choice. Subjects remained passive obeyers, not creators of the contract. But the waves of history did not stop there. As empires expanded, as nations and peoples intertwined, and as the bells of trade caravans echoed between silk and gold, humanity began to realize the will of the monarch alone cannot create true order. Power without regulation becomes tyranny. Society without consensus turns the contract into a tool for the strong. In this long evolution, the social contract underwent transformations and deepening stages. From the obedient relationship between the individual and the state to the right to collectively create order. Beneath the clear light of the Aegean Sea, the Parthenon stands atop the Acropolis, a lighthouse for the gods watching over the mortal world. In its shadow, the citizens of Athens gather in the public square, their voices intertwining in a wave of reason and passion. They are no longer subjects of royal power, but the creators of the city-state, co-rulers of their destiny. The embryonic form of the social contract began to take root in this marble-paved square. In the 6th century BC, Solon's reforms abolished debt slavery, freeing the citizens from their chains and allowing them to enter the council halls with their heads held high. Becoming the spokespeople of the state, Cleisthenes, through the practice of ostracism, gave the people the power to rid themselves of despots. Tyrants could no longer recklessly expand their ambitions, and power learned to tread cautiously under the watchful eyes of the public. By the time of Pericles, democracy was no longer the privilege of the aristocracy, but a contract for the free citizens of the city-state, a grand experiment of participation, consensus, and governance. However, this experiment never truly reached the ideal of universal equality. It was still a conspiracy of the few, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners from citizenship. At this moment, the social contract was still an aristocratic oath, not a universal promise for all of humanity. Athens' attempt was a dazzling flash of lightning, yet also a fragile, fleeting light. When the shadow of war covered the Aegean, and internal strife and greed tore the city-state apart, the assembly devolved into a battleground for populist struggles. In the end, Athens' spirit of freedom could not withstand the iron heels of Macedonia. Alexander the Great conquered Greece, returning the world to the control of kings. Yet the light ignited by Athens did not truly extinguish. As the legions of Rome marched across the Mediterranean, and the echoes of eloquence and debate resonated through the halls of the Senate, humanity once again sought to expand the boundaries of the social contract. This time, it was no longer confined to a single city-state, but encompassed an entire empire. In 451 BCE, the birth of the 12 Tables marked a further realization of the spirit of the social contract. This code, inscribed on bronze tablets, was no longer merely the decree of a monarch, but a set of common rules for all citizens. It proclaimed to the world that law was not a mere tool of power, but the cornerstone of social order. Before the law, all are equal. Though this ideal was never fully realized, it laid the foundation for a new concept, one in which the state was no longer merely a projection of the ruler's will, but began to take shape as the product of a civic contract.
These are the words of Gaius Julius Caesar, direct descendant of Venus, proconsul of Gaul, glorious imperator of the northern legions. Citizens, I have returned to Italy with the sole intention of claiming my legal and moral rights. I have no desire for unlawful powers. I will name no man an enemy who does not so declare himself. Even so, the property of those enemies will not be appropriated, and their person will remain inviolate as long as their opposition be peaceful. Moreover, to any man that has taken arms against me and now regrets it, I gladly offer total amnesty. However, those that continue to use violence to oppose my legal rights, they shall receive that which they seek to give. Under the auspices of Jupiter Capitolinus, these are the words of Gaius Julius Caesar.
However, this transformation could not shatter the chains of the past. The Republic ultimately succumbed to the Empire. The forum of democratic debate could not withstand the force of ambition and steel. When Caesar's sword gleamed in the twilight of Rome, he not only cut through the Senate's decadence, but also reshaped the relationship between law and power. In the end, Augustus established the empire. Law remained a tool of governance, but it was no longer the expression of the people's will. Instead, it became the foundation of imperial authority. As Rome's territories expanded, law was no longer confined to the citizens of a single city-state, but began to reconcile the traditions of different cultures and peoples. When the empire stretched from Britain to the Euphrates, a new spirit of contract emerged, one that was no longer limited to a single nation, but sought to create a universal legal order. In the 6th century A.D., Emperor Justinian compiled the Corpus Juris Civilis, not merely as a codification of Roman law, but as the foundation of Europe's future legal systems. When medieval jurists pored over its pages, under the dim candlelight of monasteries, when university halls echoed with the idea that law governs power, Rome's spirit of contract was reborn. The social contract has never been merely a tool of rulers, but a declaration of humanity's continuous struggle to transcend its own chains. Greece and Rome did not deliver a perfect contract to the world, but they laid the groundwork for what was to come. From the Agora of Athens to the courts of Rome, from the flames of debate to the bronze tablets of law, humanity has ultimately learned it. Order should not belong solely to the rulers. It must be safeguarded by the people. as the last splendor of Rome crumbled beneath flames and iron hooves, as the western winds swept up the ashes, scattering the glory of the once great empire across a desolate land. Europe descended into a long night. The war horses of the barbarians trampled upon the ruins of shattered columns, while the candlelight of monks flickered in desolate monasteries, seeking lost order in an age of darkness. Yet the spirit of social contracts was never extinguished. It transformed into another form, lying dormant in the soil of feudalism, awaiting the tides of time. On the surface, feudalism was an exchange of obligations and protection. But in reality, it was a web of power intricate and inescapable. Like a spider, the king wove this web, granting fiefs to nobles in exchange for loyalty and military service. The nobles, in turn, became rulers of their own small domains, distributing land to knights. At the very bottom of this food chain, serfs were like caged birds, bound to the land for generations, toiling endlessly with no hope of escape. This was no contract of equality, but a system that wielded dominance under the guise of promise. The king and nobles looked down from their towers of power, while the serfs struggled in the mud of the earth. Power was nothing more than a game of precarious balance. The nobles gained influence through their oaths of loyalty. The king maintained his rule through feudal pledges, and the labor of the serfs was the foundation that kept this pyramid from collapsing. Yet the river of history never stands still. The chains of feudal contracts would, in time, begin to loosen. As the chimes of trade caravans echoed across Europe, as merchant convoys returned from the distant east laden with treasures and knowledge, and as markets flourished in the shadows of fortresses, a silent transformation was brewing. The rise of cities spread like wild grass across feudal lands. Guilds and autonomous municipalities forged a new order, and merchants no longer relied on nobles, but instead ransomed their own freedom with gold. A monetary economy replaced the land-centered feudal structure, allowing serfs to gain breathing room as tenant farmers. Feudal lords could no longer rule solely through land and military might. Wealth's movement subtly shifted the balance of power. The people were no longer mere petitioners seeking protection, but claimants demanding rights. When they realized that wealth could buy dignity, and that the marketplace offered more security than the Lord, the very foundations of the feudal system began to waver. But change is never confined to economics. It inevitably reaches the pinnacle of power. When feudal contracts are seen as shackles by the king, when rulers attempt to place themselves above the law, the call for resistance will sound. In 1215 England, a clash of power unfolded on the fields of Runnymede, just outside London. King John, through heavy taxation and tyranny, had enraged the nobility. He sought to tear apart the feudal contract and shape himself into an absolute monarch. Yet when power oversteps its bounds, nobles and commoners alike will rise. The Magna Carta, a charter written with swords and blood, struck the first crack in the iron grip of royal authority. It declared to the world, the king is not above the law. This was more than just a noble rebellion against the monarch. It was a rebirth of the spirit of social contract. From this moment on, rule was no longer the mere expression of a ruler's will, but was bound by law and institutional limits. For the first time in history, power was placed within the framework of a contract. The state was no longer the personal possession of a king, but a community upheld by law. The feudal system did not collapse overnight. Rather, it eroded over centuries, like a fortress gradually weathered by time. The ravages of the Black Death increased the value of labor, leading serfs to demand better conditions. The humanist ideals of the Renaissance prompted people to reconsider the worth of the individual. The tides of the Reformation challenged the notion that faith was solely the domain of kings. As the shadow of absolutism spread across Europe, and monarchs sought to reclaim their loosening grip, a new struggle emerged. Nobles and commoners joined forces to challenge autocratic rule. Parliamentary institutions rose to curb the power of monarchs. The end of the feudal contract signaled the dawn of a new contractual era, one no longer based on the exchange of land, but on a pact between the people and their rulers, founded on rights and obligations. From the Magna Carta to the Enlightenment, from feudal oaths to democratic institutions, the journey of the social contract is far from over. Like a vessel sailing down the great river of history, it carries humanity's aspirations for order and justice toward an uncertain future. The next episode, the birth and challenges of the modern social contract. When the dawn's light brushes over the Seine River in France, when the printing presses along the Thames in London spend day and night, when Voltaire's pen cuts through the silence of the church, humanity begins to awaken from the nightmare of feudalism. This was not a sudden awakening, but rather the eruption of reason long suppressed over millennia. Breaking free in the cracks of the age. The enlightenment spread like wildfire, burning away the sacred ore of divine right and absolute monarchy. Locke's words shone like the morning star, telling the world that governmental power was not a divine gift, but derived from the trust of the people. Rousseau, in The Social Contract, painfully wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." These ideas swept through society like a storm, shaking the foundations of monarchy and the thunder of philosophy and debate. But this transformation was not merely confined to paper. It was forged in the baptism of blood and fire, becoming a reality. When the Liberty Bell rang in Philadelphia, when the guillotine loomed over Paris, when the chains of the old regime were heated red by the flames, humanity finally began to write its own contract upon the ruins. In 1776, the United States saw the birth of the Declaration of Independence, a poem of liberty declaring that all men are created equal. Yet this equality was still monopolized by white men. Black people remained in chains, and women remained silent behind their household doors. However, this declaration planted a seed, waiting for the storm's baptism, for the rain of time to nourish it so that it might sprout and grow. In 1789, the walls of the Bastille crumbled under the fury of the masses, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen echoed through marble halls, proclaiming to the world that the law was no longer a tool of the monarch, but a covenant of all citizens. Yet the flames of revolution always burn too fiercely, and ultimately consume themselves. The reign of terror descended, tens of thousands of heads rolled across the squares, and the dream of the social contract was tainted by the blade of extremism. Amid the chaos, Napoleon stepped onto the ruins of the Republic. Seizing power in the name of stability, he reshaped order. But in doing so, he once again reduced the people to mere subjects. It turns out that overthrowing tyranny is not enough. The true challenge lies in ensuring that the contract stands firm in the muddy reality, resisting the gales of power that would sweep it away.
forgive, dear, since times are so hard. My song to the poor, it doth pay some
When the black smoke from
regard.
chimneys obscures the
Being
sky,
dead, I'm weaving out of fall. But I hope in a few
when the
months
roar of machines
it will make
replaces
men
the songs
strong.
of birds in the countryside, and when crowds surge into factories like tides, the social contract faces new challenges. The Industrial Revolution tore apart the tranquility of the old era, as well as the relationships between people, capitalists and workers, business owners and laborers. Two opposing forces confronted each other in the dark alleys of cities and remained silent in the deep shafts of coal mines. In the European revolutions of 1848, students and workers built barricades in the streets. Their cries echoed on the cobblestone roads, demanding not just freedom, but the right to survive, the dignity of work. It was in this moment that Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, coldly exposing the illusion of capitalism. The world was not a shared contract for all, but a system of plunder by the rich against the poor. Thus, strikes, protests, and revolutions became the war drums of industrial society, urging nations to reconsider the meaning of the social contract. Labor laws were born, social welfare systems began to take shape, and the state ceased to be merely a tool of the rulers, evolving into a mediator between capital and labor. But this balance was only temporary, for a new war was already brewing in the darkness. As the dawn of the 20th century cast its light upon the ruins of Europe, humanity realized that the social contract had once again collapsed. When the Nazi flag waved over Berlin, when Soviet purges buried dissenters beneath frozen tundras, and when dictators built prisons in the name of the people.
Oh, Christ.
Yeah, try that, sir.
Check the angle lever. Maybe it's bent.
No. You wouldn't hear a click. It was the angle of it's the pin.
Maybe it's the pin. Maybe the pin shaft is greasy.
What did I just say? Yeah.
Herr Commandant,
Let me see.
I beg to report that my heap of hinges was so unsatisfactory because the machines were being recalibrated this morning. I was put on to shoveling coal.
Humanity's most sacred vows were trampled beneath the boots of power. The two world wars destroying not only cities, but also humanity's trust in the social contract. Nations once seen as places of refuge have become machines of slaughter. Laws once symbols of justice had turned into tools of persecution. As the wars ended, humanity began to ask, is it still possible to rebuild the social contract? In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was born, a pledge written to all humankind. It promised that regardless of race, gender, or faith, every person possessed fundamental freedoms and dignity. This contract was no longer bound to any single nation, but belonged to the entire world.
Welcome to the dark side of the moon, gentlemen.
Every time they take a pot shot at us, they're figuring us out. When the big one comes.
The Taliban's are here!
There's the big one. Saddle up. Everybody fall back. Enemy in the wire.
Find cover! We need to retake this camp. We don't have to fear. Our ammo depot is 40 yards away. There's everything we need to stay in this fight. 20. You're all right, mate! Come on, put your arms around me. You're not gonna die, okay? RPG!
Yet, while domestic contracts gradually solidify, nations continue to battle in hobbled state of nature as the Berlin Wall stood tall between East and West, as the Cuban Missile Crisis held the world in breathless suspense, and as the shadow of nuclear weapons loomed over the skies, the international community remained locked in an endless power game. Though the concept of international contracts emerged, it remained a fragile sheet of paper, incapable of stopping the steel torrent of the Cold War. The United Nations, treaties, negotiations, these mechanisms were established, yet they could never overcome the calculations of national interest. Time and again, humanity signed peace treaties at the negotiating table, only to tear them apart on the battlefield.
Nobody is safe.
A nightmare becomes reality.
A nuclear weapon has been exploded in this area.
A loose nuke, a capital destroyed, a nation in shock.
If you're at the epicenter of this blast, unfortunately, you're not going to make it. You will most likely be vaporized.
Today, the threat of a nuclear attack is greater than ever.
There's no dispute, whatever. This is where Al-Qaeda wants to go.
A look inside the government's plan to save America.
The worst case scenario really is that a nuclear weapon could wipe out the entire leadership of the U.S. government.
The threat is real. The clock is ticking. Is America ready for the day after disaster?
The history of the social contract is an unfinished poem, a painting still in progress. From the stone tablets of Babylon to the democratic squares of Athens, from the Roman Senate to the guillotines of Paris, from the factories of the industrial age to the negotiation tables of the Cold War, humanity has continuously written contracts only to tear them apart time and again. The essence of a contract is not a gift from rulers, but a choice of the people. History teaches us that order should not belong to emperors, but should be forged collectively by the people. This is not just a legacy of the past. It is also the challenge of the future. And now new questions have emerged. The rise of technology, the control of data, the environmental crisis, the impact of artificial intelligence. Can humanity, in this new era, craft a new contract to uphold both freedom and order? This unfinished story awaits our next chapter.
Thank you for watching V for Vision Your Lens into Global Politics. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join the conversation, stay informed, and keep questioning the world around you.